Okay, it looks like that witness is off the stand. Aaron Keller, I'm here with Aaron Keller, my colleague at Law&Crime. We're covering the Williams case. We had openings this morning, Aaron, and now several neighbors have been discussing what they saw. We know we're in for a tough case. I mean, tough in the sense, not legally, though it may be that as well, but tough in the sense of the facts that we're going to hear, because we're talking about the death of a 10-year-old child, the death of a 10-year-old child with special needs, foster child. The defendant in the stand is the foster father of this child. We're going to hear hard facts, and they're just going to start beginning.
These are emotional facts.
Yes.
Look, we have a 10-year-old child here who was fostered by this defendant, ultimately adopted by this defendant, and the accusation is that this defendant was holding the boy's feet under hot water, holding him underwater when he was trying to discipline him, as if that would somehow make the boy listen.
And we've got so much more to come. Let's go back to court now. We have another witness on the stand. Yes, so we have the 911 dispatcher talk. We're hearing the 911 tape, and the audio is very difficult to hear. So I want to talk to you about it while you can still see what's going on in the courtroom. It's very hard to hear the audio, but what's very important for you to know is that this is the 911 tape that you're hearing from the little boy's grandmother, who was there at the scene when the little boy was being allegedly tortured. And the grandmother is saying, and this is what it was being in quotes, underwater, danger, and I have Aaron Keller here to analyze with me, underwater, danger, near drowning situation, no change in color. End of quote. That is the information that was provided by the caller to the dispatcher. The caller being the grandmother, the natural grandmother of the little boy, Kentai, who was there, the victim here in this case, by the foster father, allegedly. Okay, so that is setting the scene for you as to what you're hearing, because the audio is so difficult to hear. Aaron, what are you making of this as you're hearing it right now?
Well, you know, these recordings are always hard to pick
Very
out
hard to
in
pick
court
out,
because you've got a phone and then it's being played, and then we're trying to pick it up.
So we're trying to give it to you right now and analyze it to you right now.
But look, I mean, this sounds like a pretty clear-cut factual scenario, because you've got a woman saying into the phone, I was here and I witnessed this.
Right, exactly.
This is what I saw go down. And I saw, according to the grandmother, unconscious, burn marks on his feet. Leon Williams told the victim, Kente, to go take a bath, but when the boy started arguing and refused to listen, this whole thing went down. So you have someone with some first-hand knowledge of what's going on here.
And can I just stop you for a second? And for the very fact, let's back up for a second, for the very fact that the grandmother is calling 911, right? She senses urgency and an emergency. She's making that phone call and then saying all these things to the operator at that moment in time with her grandson. Go ahead.
Yeah, and this is probably why it came in, because normally there's a big question about how much you can bring in from a 911 call, because it raises confrontation clause issues, it raises hearsay issues. But one of the exceptions, of course, is a present sense impression, as you certainly know, Lis. So if she's there in the moment talking about it, as if she's dictating what she's literally looking at, that's one of the ways that this can come in. It adds to the credibility of the statements.
Right, exactly. Okay. Very good. We're going to take a little break now, and we will be back on the other side with more live testimony in the Williams case in Georgia. It's very exciting. And whenever something like this happens, where we have an audio issue with what's happening in the courtroom, you can make sure, you be sure that Aaron and I will be here to analyze for you. I thought it was very important to break in there to make sure that you knew that it was the grandmother that was calling in, what she was saying, because of course what is happening in that moment, in that very moment where the grandmother is worried enough about calling 911, it's critical. So let's go to break, and we'll be right back on the other side. All right, so this is a neighbor, a former neighbor of the defendant, who had conversations with the defendant about the little boy. And according to the neighbor, and recordings, the defendant said, "I'm going to beat him. I'm going to kill him." These are the quotes that the defendant has. I mean, I'm going to beat him. I'm going to kill him. And then they talked about less aggressive ways of discipline. This is all about disciplining the child. I mean, Aaron, this is pretty good evidence against him.
This is all direct evidence. You have people who are sitting there on the witness stand telling jurors in day one of a murder trial with a number of attached charges that they watched this behavior go down. This isn't medical examiner testimony where the medical examiner is looking at injuries and trying to backtrack things. This isn't circumstantial evidence. This is people up there telling jurors, I watched this go down. We've got the neighbor. We've got the grandmother who called 911. Who witnessed some of this, okay? And eventually, apparently we have admissions from the defendant to police that a number of these things were going on. So,
but he was doing it differently. It was all, this is all couched in this neighbor, but getting back to this neighbor and now, it's all couched into different forms of disciplining the child. Because the neighbor is all coming back to, well, there's different ways you can do it. There are different ways if you could discipline a child other than beating him like this. Right? I mean, that's what it's all about. But he's like, I'm beating him, but then I'm going to kill him.
The neighbor's probably trying to make sense of this stuff and turning around and saying, okay, you know, boy, that sounds a bit extreme. Maybe you want to do this, you know, to give some degree of sane guidance here.
Especially when he says, I'm going to kill him.
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, of course, the state's accusation is that that is not what happened. It's not, not the way it went down.
Right, exactly. And here you have a neighbor. What I also like from the prosecution side about this neighbor is that there's no axe to grind, right? There's no reason that this guy, you know, he's not in business or in competition or anything. There's no reason that this guy wants to be here testifying about his former neighbor. There's nothing going on there. He just except to say, this is what I heard and this is what I witnessed.
A lot harder to impeach a witness, of course, that's impartial, and it would seem, based on what we saw go down in court, that yeah, the neighbor's just up there telling the truth because that's what he feels his duty is to do.
Right. There's nothing else. There is nothing else there. Exactly. So that's it with this neighbor. I think we should go on. Let's hear more about this testimony from this neighbor. Again, we're now in replays because we're on a break from the Williams trial. So let's go back to that neighbor. Lis Wiehl with Law&Crime. Aaron Keller, right before we went to break, we saw a video that one of the neighbors had taken of the little boy, 10 years old, who is the victim in this case, in the Williams case that we're seeing now in Georgia. Murder case, 2 degrees of murder in this case, in fact. It's just started today. It is so emotional. You and I are sitting here, and we've seen a lot of cases, covered a lot of cases. I've prosecuted cases, murder cases, but we're just, I mean, it's just so sad. I mean, it's just really sad.
We see this recording.
So we see this video. What do you think?
We see the recording of the defendant and the victim walking along in a day in the neighborhood as if they're off to the park to share a lunch. But what they didn't know was that day that victim would wind up dead. So it's a haunting video.
What they also didn't know is that this neighbor, Mr. Lemons, is actually recording them. Right.
Yeah, and why? That's the question that I have. Why is that neighbor making that recording? Did he think that this guy's threats were so credible that he needed to capture some piece of evidence to prove that I had this actual discussion with them?
Yeah.
What's the reason behind the recording?
Remember, this is the same person who has just testified, and we've heard today that he heard the defendant say, "I'm going to kill him." I mean, he said it out of his own mouth. He testified that he said it. So this is the same guy who now is taking the recording. Look, I pointed to you. Do you know anybody, or do you know anybody that would take recordings of your neighbor and their son out for a walk like that? I don't.
I probably would if I thought that the neighbor was up to no good, that something was going on, if I suspected something. But the next question is, did the neighbor suspect enough to call the police? And the answer apparently was no. And somewhere in there, one has to wonder, what's the gap? So I'm just sort of speculating about what's going on. Yes, but I'm trying to get inside this guy's head. So if I were cross-examining him, I would say...
The neighbor or the defendant?
neighbor.
Okay.
If I were cross-examining the neighbor, I'd turn around and say, say, well, you thought it was remarkable enough to record it, but you didn't think it was remarkable enough to call the police, so you must not have thought that it was urgent or imminent.
What's going on?
What would he have said? Yes, you didn't call the police. Well, no, I didn't. So, you know, somewhere
he didn't
there,
have enough. He didn't have enough. He didn't have. I hate to say it, but he didn't have a bloody kid. I'm concerned about this. You know, he could have called the police, or he could have called social services and said, "I'm concerned about the language that's coming out of this guy's mouth. He just threatened some violent discipline. I tried to get him back on track. I made a recording of him to prove that I had the conversation." I'm not sure that this neighbor went so far as to report any of this to the authorities. Right.
So the question is, how serious did the neighbor think it was? Assuming that he made the recording because he thought something was strange.
Right.
And then his worst suspicions were then discovered to be real. He may be looking back, hating himself, saying that I wish that I had done a little bit more. But he may have made the recording. And again, this is just speculation. But he may have made the recording because he thought something strange was up, and he wanted to preserve at least some evidence that he had seen them that day and had a conversation.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. I mean, there's no, and look at the way that the recording is made. It's made from a sort of down, even on a basement level, sort of looking up at them as they're walking up, you know, just the angle of it, right? There's no way you could say that this is just the neighbor himself out looking at butterflies or something, and a nice, beautiful day. He's aiming directly at them. This is taking of them. It's not in any kind of way where they know that he's taking it of them. I mean, this is absolutely a covert operation, if you will, of the neighbor. And it is after the testimony or after the statements have been made about, I am going to discipline to the kid to the point of killing the kid. Okay, so that's what this neighbor is doing. The neighbor knows something's up, but the neighbor doesn't call the cops. But that doesn't surprise me at all, because people die on the street and people don't call the cops, and that just is a fact in this, you know, in this country. All right, very interesting. We're going to continue with another clip. In this case, it happened earlier today. Another neighbor, more testimony in the Williams case. Now, remember, we're in Georgia. In the Williams case, a 10-year-old boy is dead. We'll continue with the testimony. Oh, you know what? No, we're not. We're not going to continue with replays, because now we are back in court. The break is over. Now we're back to live testimony. So bear with me. We're back with live testimony in the Williams case in Georgia. All right, we've just had the first responder, the first fire investigator responder on the scene in the Williams case. Mr. Walker, he said he was the officer in charge of the day. He was dispatched for the 10-year-old who had cardiac arrest. Aaron Keller's with me here. He was dispatched. He said he entered the unit. He saw the boy's grandmother, who told the investigator, the responder, where the little boy was. He said he saw the defendant doing chest maneuvers, chest compressions on the little boy, and he said he saw red blotches on the skin, and we just saw here that he was showing on the, you know, where the red blotches were on the skin. That he asked the defendant for patient information, that the defendant was not able to give patient information. You know, interesting. This is the testimony is moving quickly. We're trying to keep you apprised of what's going on. We've got a new witness on the stand, so we're going to break back to courtroom, and Aaron will be back with you as soon as we can. Back to the witness. All right, so we're hearing live testimony there of the paramedic who was on the scene after the firefighter, and you know, she's going through all of the really horrific scenes and moments that the defendant went through. I mean, she's really confirming for us that, you know, he was trying to, quote, breathe underwater, Aaron. That was resuscitation that they tried to do unsuccessfully, of course, in the end. But there were really attempts there by the paramedics. There was a pulse. They tried to get it back. There was gallant effort going on, and there was the child was trying to breathe while underwater. So there was all that going on. And that's very sad, and they did a great job, but, you know, too unsuccessfully. But let's go back now to what we're really here to study, which is guilt or innocence. And I want to go back to the firefighter before the paramedic, who came onto this scene as he's testified, of seeing the defendant now on the victim and looking like he's trying to resuscitate, hence the compression and the marks of the compression that you see in the photo of the fingers of the compression, like trying to do, you know, CPR. But tellingly was it for you that when asked about details about the boy, you know, details about any kind of, who is he, details about him, nothing forthcoming?
Yeah, the defendant says nothing in response to questions from first responders. And that's a bit bizarre, because normally you would think that someone who's entrusted to care for a child, I mean, this guy was a foster father and then adopted this child. So he assumed responsibility for this child's care. Normally, someone in that position, when asked information about that patient, you know, that person would spit it out right away.
Are you doing this?
Okay, yeah, I mean,
you know.
He's 10 years old. He said, this is what happened. You can help him, you know, what can I do? And, you know, something like that, something urgent to try to help the thing move along. And this guy, just silence. Now, could the prosecutor argue, in summation, that that's some consciousness of guilt? The answer is yes, I think. The prosecutor could turn around and say the reason that that guy didn't say anything in that critical moment was because he was responsible and he didn't know what to say. Evidence of consciousness of guilt. I think that that's where they were going.
And what that means is that he knew that whatever he would say would implicate him, because he put the child in that position, consciousness of guilt. So to say, hey, yeah, it's because he was burned and you better look at his feet, or you better do this or that, or, you know, you better look at his lungs because he's drowning because I put him there, it would implicate himself. To get the solution for the child would be to implicate himself, consciousness of guilt,
yeah,
right?
I mean, and look, it's a little bit different when you're dealing with a first responder asking questions than a police officer, because there's different analyses and whatever legally, because, you know, police, it's more about, you know, custodial interrogation. First responder, it's more about getting accurate medical care. This guy didn't even help with that.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh, I mean, there's so much to parse here. There really is, that you come into that kind of scene, but immediately that emotional response is not there. He doesn't react exactly in the way that you would be thinking. Oh, we'll come back after this, right after this break. More on the Williams case in Georgia right after this break. Well, sometimes you listen to stunning testimony, and we've just heard some from this paramedic. Actually, a very nice lady who stayed with the victim after he was dead. She said she just couldn't leave him. She arrived, and you know, the paramedic here, she tried to resuscitate him. But listen to this. She said that she heard him say, she or another, or it may have been the neighbor said, heard him say, DFAS ain't going to give me another kid now. Aaron Keller.
I mean, this defendant's not helping himself with pretty much anything that he has said or done here. I think that what the witness is referencing was the Division of Family and Children's Services in Georgia. Okay,
ain't gonna give me another
Family
kid
Services is not going to give me another kid now. Of course, remember, this victim was adopted. But listen, listen to what the witness said about the state that this 10-year-old victim was in. Water in the trachea, indication of trying to breathe underwater. In other words, it sounds like he was drowned. Peeling skin on the feet from the burns to the feet. Multiple bruises. Rigor mortis was setting in when the boy was being transported to the hospital, so he had been gone for a while. They tried to bring him back. Look, I remember getting first aid certification with CPR earlier this year, and the one thing that this professional firefighter who taught the course said that rings in my ears listening to this is that the hardest thing about trying to resuscitate a child is knowing that you're trying to resuscitate a child, that there's that mental element of it. And this witness is being stoic. I'm sure that she had to spend a lot of time mentally preparing herself for this testimony, but that statement rings true in listening to this testimony.
Especially when she says, just as she did just a moment ago, that even though when she knew that he was gone, that she couldn't bear to just leave him, that she sat there with him before somebody, you know, actually came and took what was then his body away.
Yeah,
and this is a professional that we're talking about, somebody that sees.
She's seen it all.
She's seen it all. But she sat there and she said, I know I'm being sentimental, but I just couldn't bear to just leave him there. And this is not, it's not related to him at all or anything like that. But another thing that the defendant said, he said, I gotta go, I need to get out of here. Now, okay, maybe you could say, you know, that was father's grief or something like that, but this is also after he did not again give information about the child having autism, about having seizure problems, which she found out, as she's testified now, later. I mean, you don't see anger in her really very much, but I just wonder if underneath she is sort of, you know, seething a little bit that she wasn't told. Not that it necessarily would have made a difference in this case. I mean, he may have just been too far gone because of the burning and because of the drowning already, and that he was, you know, coughing in his own, you know, he's drowning. But you just wonder so much. Aaron, we've got to leave it at that. We're going to take a quick break right now. After the break, Aaron Keller and I will be here, and of course we'll be going back to live testimony in the Williams case in Georgia.
I'm going to show you what's...
Okay, just on the stand now, a crime investigator. But I want to take a minute to go back to Aaron Keller here before we wrap up here on Law and Crime for the day, to kind of reassess where we are in this case. This is the first day of the Williams case in Georgia. This really emotional case with this 10-year-old boy who was very brutally murdered, ostensibly by his father, allegedly by his father. Today, Aaron, we've heard from several witnesses, neighbors. We even had a video taken by one of the neighbors we saw in that video the little boy and his father. Very strange thing for a neighbor to take of this video of the day of the actual murder of this little boy. And we heard from the paramedic just moments ago who talked about what she saw and the state that this little boy and then his body was in. It was just horrifying testimony. What do you make of this prosecution's case so far and the statements that the defendant himself has made to some of the neighbors?
Look, this defendant has talked about committing some kind of vile acts against this victim with the neighbors, okay? They were perhaps viewed as threats at the time, but then when the threats became true, those statements became all the more valuable as evidence, okay, and highly probative evidence at that. So you've got the statements to the neighbors. You've got his behavior in front of the firefighter who was performing CPR in the house. You've got his bizarre behavior back at the morgue where he finds out that the child is dead and says he wants to get out of there. Okay, how many more tells is this defendant going to give away? If somebody were playing poker against him, they would beat him in every single hand because it seems to me that this is all consciousness of guilt. He's made statements. He weirded his neighbors out with statements that he made about the kid, and he's got all this other stuff.
To the point where he took the video.
Yeah, to the point where he took the video. So this is a really strong prosecution case. And look, I realize at the beginning of the case, it always feels stronger for the prosecution because they have the evidence up first. But this thing is not circumstantial. This is eyewitnesses who have direct things to say about this guy.
Then you know what my question is then next. Why is this case going to trial? Why is there even a trial here where we have to go through all these details about what happened? Why is this case even going to trial? Why didn't the defense try to work out some kind of lesser plea here?
Maybe the defense did. Maybe the defendant didn't want to hear it. Maybe the state didn't give a kind enough offer in the defendant's eyes. Maybe he thought that he could beat some of this. Look, the defendant has the constitutional right to hold the state to its burden of proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt.
I'm not saying that. That's obvious. I'm just saying
maybe the state didn't want to give much of
an
offer because the state knew that it could get a conviction with the weight of the evidence. Possible.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't want to give anything up. This is a child, and brutally, I mean, to the point where, you know, I feel like you and I have seen a lot, and you and I are just not it's very hard for us to take a look at this.
There's another thought that went through my head about why they may have done this, and it may have been because there were some insinuations that child services in that state didn't do enough in investigating. So maybe the prosecutor is saying the state has to try to make this right.
There you go.
We're going to step in.
How could a state agency, if this is true, let a man have a boy like this and let him treat a boy like this to this point where this happened with this little boy? I'm Lis Wiehl for Law and Crime. Aaron Keller, thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow.